The Woman with a Heart Too Kind. Emma Reyes woke up before dawn, the faint light of morning barely touching the edges of her small apartment window. The old fan hummed in the corner, stirring the warm San Francisco air while she buttoned her faded uniform with hands that trembled from exhaustion. She had not slept more than 3 hours, but there was no time to rest. Her younger sister Lily was already awake in the next room, coughing softly, and that sound alone was enough to push Emma into motion. For 3 years, Emma had carried the weight of 2 lives on her shoulders, her own and her sister's. Their parents were gone, taken in a car accident that left Lily with a lung condition that required constant medication. Since then, every breath Lily took seemed to remind Emma of her purpose. She had promised her dying mother that she would take care of Lily no matter what, and Emma had built her entire existence around keeping that promise. She tied her dark hair into a neat bun, forcing a small smile into the cracked mirror. The reflection staring back at her didn't look like the girl she once knew. There were tired lines around her eyes, and her once bright smile now looked faint, as if it cost her something each time she tried. Yet beneath that fatigue, there was still a quiet strength, the kind that comes from love, not pride. She whispered softly to her reflection, as she often did each morning. "You can do this. Emma, just one more day." It was a lie she repeated, not because she believed it, but because Lily needed her to. The aroma of instant coffee filled the kitchen as she poured the last spoonful from a nearly empty jar. She couldn't afford another one until payday. Lily rolled her wheelchair to the table, her face pale but brightened by her sister's presence. "Did you sleep?" she asked. Emma smiled the way older sisters do when they want to protect someone from the truth. "A little. Don't worry about me." She placed the steaming cup in front of Lily, pretending not to notice her own empty mug. "Your breakfast is in the pan. Mrs. Patel will come by later to check on you while I'm gone." Lily's lips pressed into a thin line. "You're always working, Em. You never stop." Emma touched her cheek gently. "One day I will, Lil, when you're better. Then maybe we can go somewhere by the sea, remember? You love the ocean." Lily smiled weakly, her eyes distant with dreams they both knew were too expensive to afford. By 7 o'clock, Emma was walking briskly toward the Golden Harbor Dine and Lounge, her worn shoes clicking against the wet pavement. The restaurant was one of the city's most elegant dining spots, a place where crystal glasses sparkled and laughter from rich businessmen echoed like music from another world. It was also a place where people like Emma were invisible, unless they made a mistake. She clocked in at the back entrance, tied her apron, and greeted the other servers with polite nods. Vincent Lowe, the manager, was already barking orders near the kitchen, his voice sharp and impatient. He was the kind of man who measured people's worth by how much they could make him look good. "Reyes, you're late by 2 minutes, he snapped as she passed. "Sorry, sir, the bus was delayed," Emma replied quickly. "Excuses don't serve tables. Get to work." His tone left no room for kindness. Emma began her shift the way she always did, with quiet focus and a smile that never reached her eyes. The morning rush filled the restaurant with noise and the smell of roasted coffee beans and buttered bread. She moved between tables like a dancer, refilling cups, delivering plates, and apologizing when wealthy customers demanded more napkins, less ice, or an extra smile. Every minute meant another tip, another piece of rent, another bottle of Lily's medicine. She had learned to live in moments measured by gratitude and survival. At one of the corner tables sat a man Emma hadn't seen before. He looked to be in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, dressed in a gray tailored suit that spoke of quiet power rather than showy wealth. His dark hair was streaked with silver near the temples, and he had a stillness about him that made him seem different from the other businessmen who usually filled the room. He was watching something outside the window with an expression Emma couldn't quite read, part sadness, part curiosity. When she approached with his order, he smiled faintly. "Thank you," he said, his voice calm but strong. "You seem very busy." Emma nodded politely. "Yes, sir, but I'm used to it." "You handle pressure well," he said, as if making a mental note. She smiled again and walked away, not realizing that she had just served Alexander Grant, the owner of one of the largest construction firms in California. As lunchtime came closer, the restaurant grew crowded. Expensive perfume, clinking glasses, and laughter blended into the usual rhythm. But outside, across the glass wall that separated the warm luxury from the cold world beyond, sat a woman wrapped in an old blanket. Her face was lined with hardship and her hands trembled as she held a cardboard sign that read, "Hungry and Alone." Emma's gaze lingered on her longer than it should have. Something about the woman's tired eyes reminded her of her mother during her final days. Every time she passed that window, her heart pulled a little harder. She told herself not to look again, not to risk trouble, but kindness is a habit that can't be unlearned. When her short break arrived, Emma slipped into the kitchen. "Rosa," she whispered to the cook, a plump woman with kind eyes. "Can you pack a small meal for someone outside?" "I'll pay for it later," Rosa frowned. "You know the rules, honey. Mr. Lowe doesn't like us giving food away." "Please," Emma said softly. "I'll take responsibility." With a sigh, Rosa nodded and wrapped up a small container of soup, bread, and fruit. Emma thanked her and tucked it into a paper bag, her hands trembling not from fear but from hope, the hope that one act of kindness could ease someone's pain. She crossed the street quickly, rain beginning to sprinkle down as she knelt beside the old woman. "Here," she said gently. "It's still warm." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "You're an angel," she whispered, clutching the bag. "I haven't eaten since yesterday." Emma smiled softly. "No one deserves to be hungry. Take care of yourself, okay?" She turned to go back, unaware that Alexander Grant had been watching from his table, his eyes narrowing in quiet disbelief. He saw how careful she was not to draw attention, how she risked her job just to show compassion to a stranger. But not everyone saw it that way. As Emma entered the restaurant again, her heart froze. Vincent stood waiting by the door, his arms crossed, his face burning red with anger. "Miss Reyes," he said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Care to explain what you were doing outside?" Emma's throat went dry. There was a woman. She was hungry. I gave her some food I paid for myself." "You what?" His voice rose sharp and cruel. "You broke company policy. We do not feed beggars near our establishment. You've invited trouble to our doorstep." Customers began to glance over, whispers spreading through the room. Emma felt her face flush but held her ground. "She was starving, sir. I only wanted to help," Vincent sneered. "Then perhaps you should find employment at a charity, not here." "You're fired." The words hit her like a slap. The world seemed to tilt as she tried to comprehend them. "Fired for an act of kindness." "Please," she said quietly, struggling to hold back tears. "I need this job. My sister is sick. I'll work extra hours, anything." "Enough," Vincent cut her off. "Pack your things and leave." The silence in the restaurant was deafening. Alexander Grant rose slowly from his table, his expression unreadable. He watched as Emma untied her apron with shaking hands, her dignity intact even as her future crumbled. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the back door. The sound of her footsteps seemed to echo through the entire dining hall. Outside, the rain fell harder. The old woman, still clutching her meal, looked up as Emma passed. "Did they hurt you, dear?" she asked, her voice full of guilt. Emma forced a small smile. "Don't worry about me. Just eat." Her voice cracked slightly at the end. "Everything will be fine." As she disappeared into the gray city streets, Alexander watched her go, a storm of thoughts behind his calm eyes. In all his years of wealth, he had seen ambition, greed, and selfishness, but what he had just witnessed was something rare, a heart untouched by the world's coldness. He took out his phone and spoke quietly to his assistant. "Find out everything you can about the waitress named Emma Reyes. I need her full background by tonight." And as the city lights began to shimmer against the rain, one simple act of compassion had set into motion a chain of events that would soon transform not just Emma's life, but his own. The stranger behind the miracle rain poured down over the city that night, tracing silver lines against the apartment windows as Emma sat in the dark, staring at the small box of her belongings from the restaurant. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, but inside her, there was only the ache of loss. The world outside continued to move. Cars splashed through puddles, people hurried with umbrellas, laughter echoed from passing cafes. Yet in her little home, time seemed frozen. She had not told Lily the truth yet. Her sister believed Emma was simply home early, because the restaurant had closed due to weather. Emma couldn't bear to break her heart, not when Lily's face already carried enough worry for 2 lifetimes. When Emma finally spoke, her voice was soft but heavy. "Do you ever think life punishes people for being kind, Lily?" The younger girl turned in her wheelchair, her thin frame illuminated by the dim light. What do you mean? Emma swallowed hard. Today I tried to help someone. I gave food to an old woman on the street. My manager fired me for it. Just like that. For a moment, silence hung between them like a fragile thread. Then Lily reached out and took her sister's hand. You did the right thing, Emma. Maybe the world doesn't reward kindness right away, but it will one day. You always tell me that. Emma smiled faintly, tears burning behind her eyes. I guess I needed to hear it back. She spent the next few days sending out job applications to every café, hotel, and diner she could find. Each rejection felt sharper than the last. Bills piled on the counter. The medicine box grew emptier. Yet each morning she still rose before dawn, still brewed her weak coffee, still told herself, just one more day. By the fourth day, despair began to creep in like cold water through a cracked wall. But fate, in its strange and silent way, was already preparing something behind the scenes, something she could never have imagined. Across the city, in a glass tower overlooking the bay, Alexander Grant sat in his office long after everyone had gone home. The glow from the city lights reflected on the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, but his focus was on the folder open before him. It contained everything his assistant Rachel had found about Emma Reyes: her employment record, her family background, her history of late-night shifts and hospital bills. Alexander had seen hundreds of resumes in his life, but this one was different. It wasn't the record of a failed employee. It was the record of someone who had survived impossible odds with nothing but love and determination. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He remembered her eyes, tired yet warm, the way she had smiled at that stranger in the rain. A heart like that shouldn't be broken by cruelty, he murmured. For years, Alexander had built an empire through sharp decisions, calculated moves, and ruthless efficiency. Compassion had no place in his boardrooms. But Emma's act had unsettled something in him, something he thought success had buried long ago, the belief that goodness still had power in a world obsessed with gain. By the next morning, Alexander had already set his plan in motion. He called Rachel into his office. I want to establish a charitable partnership under one of our subsidiaries, he said, his tone measured. The focus will be on assisting low-income families and people struggling to recover from financial hardship. Discreetly find a way to include Emma Reyes on the team. I don't want her to know it's connected to me. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Understood, sir. But may I ask why? Alexander looked out the window at the city below. Because people like her remind the rest of us what we're supposed to be fighting for. Meanwhile, Emma received a call from a woman named Patricia Hall, the owner of a small cafe called Harbor Brew. Patricia had heard about Emma through an old coworker from the Golden Harbor. I heard what happened to you, dear, Patricia said over the phone, her tone kind but practical. It was cruel and unfair. How about you come in tomorrow morning for an interview? We could use a heart like yours here. Emma almost dropped the phone in disbelief. Thank you, ma'am. I'll be there. The next day, the smell of coffee beans and cinnamon greeted her as she stepped inside the cafe. It was smaller and simpler than the Golden Harbor, but it felt alive. Warm laughter, hand-painted walls, soft music. Patricia, a woman in her 50s with short curly hair and a nurturing smile, welcomed her personally. You look nervous, she said. Don't be. I've already decided to hire you. I just want to see that spark in your eyes everyone talked about. Emma blinked, tears forming. You mean it? Of course. Start tomorrow morning. Let's bring some kindness back into this city. That night, when Emma returned home to tell Lily the news, her sister's laughter filled the apartment for the first time in weeks. They celebrated with soup and leftover bread, pretending it was a feast. Hope, small but bright, returned to their world. Over the next 2 weeks, Emma threw herself into her new job. She learned the names of regular customers, helped Patricia decorate the shop, and even convinced her to donate leftover pastries to a local shelter each night. Business grew, and so did Emma's quiet confidence. But she couldn't shake the feeling that someone somewhere was watching out for her. Then came another miracle. One morning, while checking mail at the building entrance, she found a letter from the City Care Foundation, informing her that her sister had been selected for a fully funded medical support program. It included hospital treatment, medicine, and physical therapy for 1 full year, entirely free. She stood frozen. rereading the letter until tears blurred the words. "It's a mistake," she whispered. "It has to be." But when she called the number listed, the representative assured her everything was real and already arranged. She rushed upstairs to tell Lily, who burst into joyful tears. "Emma, this is everything we needed." For the first time in years, Emma laughed freely, the sound echoing through their small apartment like music. She didn't know who was behind this blessing, but deep inside, she sent a silent thank you to the universe. Across town, Alexander watched the entire event unfold from his office window, through the reflection of a live-streamed foundation report. Rachel entered with a folder in hand. "It's done, sir. The foundation's funding has covered all medical costs for Miss Reyes's sister. We've kept your name out of it." Alexander nodded slowly. "Good. She doesn't need to know it came from me. She just needs her life back." But despite his careful distance, his curiosity about her grew stronger each day. He began passing by the café on his way to meetings, always sitting in a corner hidden behind a newspaper or a laptop. He watched her greet every customer with warmth, watched her tuck loose strands of hair behind her ear when she laughed, watched her quietly wipe the counter long after closing hours. She had no idea that the man sipping black coffee near the window was the same millionaire who had seen her kindness that rainy afternoon. One evening, as the sun set in gold over the bay, fate gave them their second meeting. The cafe was nearly empty when Alexander walked in, this time without disguise or pretense. He ordered coffee, and when Emma brought it to his table, their eyes met. Recognition flickered across her face. "You were at the Golden Harbor," she said softly. "You saw it." He smiled faintly. "I did." For a long moment, silence hung between them, filled with unspoken memories. Then he said, "You taught me something that day, that doing the right thing may cost us, but it's never truly lost." Emma's heart beat faster. "I just did what anyone should do." Alexander looked at her with a warmth that made her look away. "Not everyone does, and the world needs people like you more than it needs another businessman like me." She didn't know what to say, but there was something in his tone, genuine, gentle, that made her believe him. When he left, Emma stood at the door watching him disappear into the evening crowd, her thoughts spinning. There was something mysterious about him, something that told her their story was far from over. That night, as she lay awake listening to the rain tapping softly against the window, Emma realized something had changed inside her. For the first time in years, her heart wasn't heavy with fear. It was light with hope. She didn't know who Alexander really was or what role he might play in her future. But one thing was certain. The act of kindness that had once cost her everything was slowly turning into the reason her life was beginning again. And somewhere in the city's glowing skyline, Alexander Grant looked out into the night, whispering to himself, "Maybe it's not her life that's changing. Maybe it's mine." When kindness meets fate. The morning sun spilled through the cafe windows, painting soft streaks of gold across the small tables and polished counter where Emma stood, humming quietly as she arranged fresh pastries in the glass display. It had been almost a month since that unexpected conversation with Alexander, and though they had met only twice since, something about him lingered in her thoughts. She didn't know much about the man except that he carried himself with quiet grace and eyes that always seemed to hold both warmth and distance at once. Each time he visited, he sat at the same corner table near the window, reading or working on his laptop. Yet somehow his presence filled the whole cafe. And every time he left, Emma felt as if the world around her grew just a little quieter. She never admitted it aloud, but his visits had become something she looked forward to. They reminded her that life could surprise her in gentle ways, not just cruel ones. Meanwhile, Lily's condition was improving in ways that almost felt miraculous. The new therapy sessions were working wonders, and the doctors at the hospital were astonished at her recovery speed. "You're walking again soon, young lady," one of them said with a grin as Lily stood balancing between the bars during physical therapy. Emma would often sit nearby, tears glimmering in her eyes as she watched her sister's strength return. Every milestone Lily achieved felt like proof that kindness, no matter how painful at first, eventually circled back like a blessing. Yet Emma never stopped wondering who had made it possible. The City Care Foundation was new, recently established, and no one at the hospital knew much about its founder. It felt like a mystery, a silent guardian watching from afar. Alexander, sitting in his high-rise office one rainy afternoon, found himself staring at the same foundation reports he had personally signed off on. Rachel stood at the door holding another folder. "The cafe donation program you approved has been successful," she said. "They've been providing meals to over 50 families weekly. Miss Reyes was the one who organized it." A small smile touched his lips. "Of course she was." He set the papers aside and looked out at the gray skyline. "Rachel, do me a favor. Make sure the cafe's new charity permit and city grant are processed without delay." She nodded. "You're very involved in this one, sir." Alexander leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "Let's just say some people remind you that your wealth means nothing unless it changes lives." That evening, he decided to visit the cafe again, not as the distant benefactor, but simply as himself. When he entered, the door chime rang softly, and the familiar scent of roasted beans and vanilla filled the air. Emma looked up from behind the counter, her face lighting up with a genuine smile. "Good evening, Mr. Grant," she said politely, not realizing the weight his name truly carried. "Good evening, Emma. May I sit?" "Of course, your usual spot." He nodded and took his place by the window. As she brought over his coffee, their hands brushed for a brief second. A simple accident that sent a quiet warmth through both of them. "You seem happier lately," he remarked. "Things are getting better?" Emma nodded, her smile soft but radiant. "Yes, my sister's health is improving. I got promoted to assistant manager here. It feels like life is finally being kind. Or maybe," Alexander said gently, "life is just returning the kindness you've already given." They talked for a while about the cafe, about dreams, about how Emma once wanted to study nursing before her parents died. Alexander listened, truly listened, in a way few people ever had. When she spoke about Lily's courage, his heart ached with admiration. "You've given up everything for her," he said. Emma looked down at her hands. "She's all I have." When you love someone that much, sacrifice stops feeling like a burden. It becomes your reason. There was silence for a long moment, the kind of silence that said more than words could. As the days passed, Alexander's visits became more frequent. Sometimes he came early, pretending to read the newspaper just to catch the moment when Emma opened the shop. Sometimes he stayed late, helping her close the place while Patricia smiled knowingly from behind the counter. The bond between them deepened, not through grand gestures but through quiet understanding. Emma began to see him not just as a customer, but as someone who brought peace to her storm. Yet she still didn't know the truth, that the same man who sat smiling across her counter was the architect of her recent miracles. Then one afternoon, an event shattered that calm. The cafe was crowded when a man in a gray suit entered, Vincent Lowe, her former manager from the Golden Harbor. His expression was smug as he looked around, clearly recognizing her. "Well, if it isn't the charity girl," he sneered loud enough for several customers to hear. Emma froze, her hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Lowe," she said quietly, trying to remain calm. "Please don't cause a scene." "A scene?" He laughed. "I came to see if you're still feeding beggars on company time. Looks like you've downgraded to this cozy little corner of town." Alexander, sitting just a few tables away, looked up sharply. His calm eyes turned cold as he watched the confrontation unfold. Patricia stepped forward, frowning. "Sir, I think you should leave." But Vincent ignored her, stepping closer to Emma. "Tell me, how long before you get fired here too? People like you never learn. Kindness doesn't pay rent." The room went silent. Emma's cheeks burned, but she stood tall. "Maybe not," she said softly, "but at least it pays peace of mind." The customers began murmuring in support, and Alexander finally rose from his chair. His voice cut through the tension like a blade wrapped in velvet. "I suggest you apologize to her, Mr. Lowe." Vincent turned, his arrogance faltering. "And who exactly are you?" "Alexander Grant," came the calm reply. "Owner of this property block and several businesses you'd probably recognize, including the Golden Harbor restaurant." A hush fell over the cafe. Vincent's face drained of color. You own it?" Alexander nodded slowly. "And after hearing how you treat good people, you no longer work there." "I'll see to it personally." Vincent stammered, but the authority in Alexander's tone left no room for argument. He turned and stormed out, humiliated. The customers clapped quietly, and Patricia patted Emma's shoulder. "Looks like you've got guardian angels watching over you, dear." Emma turned to Alexander, speechless. He simply smiled and said, Consider it overdue justice. After that day, something shifted between them. Emma's gratitude toward him deepened, but so did her curiosity. She began wondering who he really was. What kind of man carried so much quiet influence yet spoke with humility? Their connection grew through small moments. Him helping her carry heavy boxes. Her bringing him free coffee on the house. Both pretending not to notice how easily they laughed together. One night, as the café closed and the city lights glittered outside, Alexander offered to walk her home. The air was cool and the streets shimmered with reflections from the lamplights. They talked about childhood memories, about hope, about what it meant to lose and rebuild. When they reached her apartment building, Emma paused at the door, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you always so kind to me?" He looked at her, his eyes soft. "Maybe because someone once reminded me that compassion isn't weakness, it's strength. And I needed to see that again." She smiled, feeling something inside her heart shift, something fragile but beautiful. That night, after she closed the door behind her, Emma leaned against it, her pulse still racing. She didn't know what was happening between them, but it felt like the beginning of something that went beyond gratitude, beyond circumstance. For years she had lived for survival. Now for the first time she felt like she was living for meaning. And in his penthouse across the city, Alexander stood by the window, staring out into the glowing skyline, whispering to himself, "She doesn't need to know how much she's already changed me." The rain began to fall again, soft and rhythmic, as if the heavens themselves were echoing a truth both of them already felt. That destiny had finally begun to weave their paths together, thread by thread, kindness by kindness, heart to heart. The truth beneath the kindness. The following weeks passed like pages of a story Emma could hardly believe was her own. The cafe had become more than a workplace. It was a place of laughter, warmth, and second chances. Customers returned not only for coffee but for the comfort they found in her smile. She had unknowingly turned the small cafe into something extraordinary, a refuge of humanity in a world that too often hurried past compassion. Every evening after closing, she would sit by the window with Patricia, counting the day's earnings and sharing gentle conversations about life and gratitude. But the one thing that made her heart flutter most were Alexander's visits. He came often, sometimes with quiet gifts for Lily, a book, a scarf, or a box of chocolates she could never afford. And each time he did, Emma's gratitude deepened into something she could not name. Lily, always observant, began to tease her sister playfully. "You smile differently when he's around," she'd say, her eyes full of mischief. Emma would blush and brush it off. "He's just kind, Lily, that's all." But deep down she knew it wasn't just kindness. There was something in Alexander's eyes whenever he looked at her, something unspoken, almost afraid. He treated her as though she were fragile, precious even, and that scared her more than it comforted her. Because people didn't usually stay, not in her life. They either left or life took them away. She had learned to protect her heart with silence and smiles. One chilly afternoon, while Emma was arranging flowers near the window, a black car pulled up outside. Two men in suits stepped out, followed by a woman in her 40s with a commanding presence. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. The woman approached the counter. "Excuse me," she said politely. "Is Miss Emma Reyes here?" Emma looked up, confused but calm. "Yes, that's me." "How can I help you?" The woman smiled faintly. "My name is Eleanor Grant. I believe you know my son, Alexander Grant." The world seemed to tilt for a moment. Emma's fingers froze around the vase she was holding. The name echoed in her mind. His mother? She felt the air leave her lungs. Patricia, sensing tension, stepped forward protectively. "Is there a problem?" Eleanor's smile remained courteous but distant. "No problem. I simply wanted to meet the woman who has been occupying so much of my son's attention lately." She turned to Emma, her gaze sharp but not cruel. "You see, Miss Reyes, Alexander has responsibilities. He leads one of the largest corporations in the state, and people talk when they see him spending time here." The way she said the last word, "here," carried a weight of disdain that made Emma's heart sink. "With all due respect, Mrs. Grant," Emma said softly, "Alexander and I are just friends." "Are you?" Eleanor asked, arching an eyebrow. "Because from what I've heard, he seems far too invested in your life for it to be so simple." Emma's lips parted, but no words came. She had no idea what to say. How to explain something even she didn't fully understand. Eleanor continued, her tone firm but not unkind. I don't doubt your character, Miss Reyes. In fact, I've heard that you're kind and hardworking. But people like you and people like my son live in different worlds. Sooner or later, the difference becomes a wall neither of you can climb. She paused, then added quietly, Please don't let him forget where he belongs. With that, she turned and left the cafe, her footsteps echoing softly against the tiled floor. Emma stood frozen long after the door closed. She felt a deep ache settle in her chest. Not anger, not resentment, but something far heavier, the quiet acceptance of being reminded of her place in the world. That evening, she didn't wait for Alexander to visit. She couldn't. She didn't know how to face him, not after that conversation, so when he arrived later, his smile fading as he saw her expression, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. Emma, he said gently, what happened? She looked at him with eyes full of unshed tears. Your mother came by today. Alexander's heart sank. Oh no, he whispered, rubbing his temples. Emma, I'm so sorry. She had no right. She didn't insult me, Emma interrupted softly. She just reminded me of something I already knew. We come from different worlds, Alexander. You're someone who changes skylines. I'm someone who cleans tables. Don't say that, he said firmly, stepping closer. You have more grace, more courage, more humanity than anyone I've ever met. Do you think I care about wealth or class? None of that matters to me. Emma smiled sadly. Maybe not to you, but it matters to the world around you. And someday it will matter to you too. He tried to speak, but she stopped him with a gentle hand. You've done so much for me, Alexander. You've helped Lily, given us hope, and maybe you don't realize how much that means. But please, don't fight the world for me. I'm not worth that kind of battle. Her voice broke at the end, and before he could stop her, she walked into the back room, leaving him standing in silence, torn between guilt and helplessness. That night, Alexander drove aimlessly through the rain-drenched streets, the city lights blurring past like streaks of gold and sorrow. He parked by the bay, staring at the reflection of the bridge shimmering across the dark water. His mother's words replayed in his mind, colliding with Emma's. He had spent years building his empire to control every outcome, every risk, every variable, yet here he was, powerless before something as human and unpredictable as love. He didn't know when it had begun. Maybe it was that first day in the restaurant when he saw her risk her job for a stranger, or maybe it was in the quiet conversations, the laughter shared over coffee, the look in her eyes when she spoke about her sister. But he knew now that his feelings were real, and no amount of logic or social walls could erase them. The next morning, he showed up at the cafe again, but Emma wasn't there. Patricia looked at him with sympathy. She took a few days off, she said softly. She needed space. Space from me? Space from everything, Patricia replied gently. You remind her of what she's afraid to lose. Alexander nodded, understanding though it hurt. He left quietly, deciding not to chase her, not yet. He wanted to give her peace, but he also knew he couldn't stay away for long. In the meantime, Lily's health took a sudden turn for the worse. One evening, she collapsed at home, gasping for air. Emma rushed her to the hospital, panic surging through her veins. The doctors moved quickly, but the hours that followed were agonizing. Sitting outside the emergency room, Emma felt her strength crumbling for the first time in years. She had faced poverty, humiliation, and loss, but nothing compared to the terror of losing Lily. She pressed her palms together, whispering prayers through trembling lips. Please, I can't lose her. She's all I have left. As if fate had been listening, Alexander arrived at the hospital moments later. Rachel had informed him after seeing the emergency report from the foundation. Without hesitation, he walked straight to her side. When Emma saw him, all the walls she had built shattered. She stood and collapsed into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm so scared, Alexander, she whispered. I can't do this alone. He held her tightly, his voice low and steady. You're not alone. Not anymore. Whatever happens, I'm here. Hours later, the doctor emerged with a weary smile. She's stable now, he said. We managed to control the attack. She'll need constant care for the next few weeks, but she'll recover. Emma let out a shaky breath of relief, tears streaming down her cheeks. Alexander stayed with her all night, sitting silently by Lily's bed while the girl slept peacefully. Watching him there, This powerful man who could command boardrooms yet chose to spend the night in a hospital chair? Something inside Emma began to change. Maybe love didn't always need grand promises or perfect timing. Maybe it was built in quiet moments of presence, in the way someone stayed when the world fell apart. The next morning, as dawn broke through the hospital window, Emma turned to him and whispered, "You've done so much for us." "Why?" He met her gaze with a mix of honesty and hesitation. "Because you reminded me of who I was before I lost myself to ambition. Because every time I see you fight for your sister, I see the kind of person I want to become. And maybe," he paused, his voice trembling slightly, "maybe because I love you." The words hung in the air, soft yet powerful, filling every corner of her heart. Emma looked away, her tears falling silently, not from fear but from the overwhelming realization that her life, which once seemed defined by struggle and sacrifice, had become something extraordinary, because love had found her in the most unexpected way. And for the first time in years, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was worthy of being loved in return. When hearts find their home. The weeks following Lily's recovery were a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude. The hospital room that had once been filled with fear slowly transformed into a place of quiet laughter and hope. Emma spent every day by her sister's side, helping her walk a few more steps, feeding her soup, brushing her hair, and whispering encouragement whenever pain tried to steal her courage. Alexander visited often, bringing flowers, books, and that calm presence that always seemed to ease the chaos around them. He never overstepped. He simply stayed close enough for her to feel that she wasn't alone. For Emma, his companionship became something sacred, a reminder that kindness could grow into connection and connection into something even more profound. Lily adored him. Whenever he entered the room, her tired face brightened instantly. "When I get better," she told him one afternoon, "I'm going to walk into your office and thank you for everything you've done for my sister." Alexander chuckled softly. "Then I'll make sure my office has a ramp and a red carpet waiting for you." The way he said it made Emma smile from across the room, though she tried to hide it behind her hand. She didn't want him to see how deeply he had already found a place in her heart. Yet every glance they shared, every quiet conversation at midnight while Lily slept, drew them closer in ways words could never explain. But secrets, no matter how well-intentioned, have a way of demanding the light. One afternoon, as Emma was packing Lily's things for discharge, a nurse accidentally handed her a financial statement attached to the medical file. The header read Grant Foundation, Private Benefactor Coverage. Her hands trembled as she scanned the document, the truth dawning on her with devastating clarity. All the treatments, the equipment, the therapy, the miraculous help that had saved her sister had come from Alexander. He had been the hidden guardian all along. The world seemed to spin. A rush of emotions flooded her heart. Gratitude, confusion, anger, disbelief. Why hadn't he told her? That evening, when Alexander arrived at the hospital, he found her standing by the window, the papers folded tightly in her hand. The light of sunset bathed the room in gold, but the warmth in her eyes was gone. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked quietly. He froze. "Tell you what?" "That it was you," she said, holding out the document. "The foundation, the bills, the therapy, everything came from you. You've been helping us all along." For a long moment he said nothing, the silence between them heavy and fragile. Finally he sighed. "Because I didn't want you to feel indebted to me. I didn't want my name to change the way you looked at what you earned. You deserve to rebuild your life by your own strength." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "But you lied, Alexander. You made me believe it was fate, some miracle, when all this time it was you. Do you know how humiliating it feels to realize that everything I worked for, every victory I thought was mine, was a gift from someone who pitied me?" His voice broke as he stepped closer. "It wasn't pity, Emma, it was love. I just didn't know how to show it without ruining what you already had. The pride, the independence, the courage that made you who you are. I wanted to protect that, not take it away." She turned away, unable to meet his gaze. "I don't know if I can believe that." Her voice was barely a whisper. "You of all people should understand how much it hurts to be someone's charity case." He reached for her hand, but she pulled back. "Maybe it's best if you go," she said quietly. "Lily's safe now. You've done enough." There was no anger in her tone, only exhaustion and heartbreak. He nodded slowly, his jaw tight with emotion. If that's what you want. And with that he walked out of the room, each step heavier than the last, knowing he might have just lost the one person who had taught him what love truly meant. Days turned into weeks. Emma threw herself back into work at the café, but the joy that once colored her days had dimmed. Even Patricia noticed it. "You're here, but your heart's somewhere else, dear," she said one morning. Emma just smiled faintly. "Somewhere I can't go back to." The café ran smoothly, yet every time the door opened, her heart skipped, hoping it would be him. But Alexander never came. Across the city, Alexander buried himself in work, attending meetings, signing contracts, smiling at events he barely remembered attending. His company thrived, his reputation soared, but inside he felt hollow. Every night he found himself driving past the café, watching the lights flicker through the window, unable to go in. Rachel, his assistant, noticed his distraction. "You can't keep punishing yourself like this," she told him one evening. "Sometimes the only way to make things right is to show the truth, not hide it." Her words lingered in his mind long after she left. A month later, the café received an invitation addressed to Emma Reyes. It was embossed on fine paper with a golden seal. Patricia handed it to her with raised eyebrows. "Looks important?" Emma unfolded it slowly. "You are cordially invited to the City Hope Gala, a charity event celebrating the people who inspire change." Beneath the formal lines was a note written in familiar handwriting. "Please come. There's something I need to say in front of the world." Her heart pounded as she read it again. Part of her wanted to tear it up, to forget everything, but another part, the part that still believed in forgiveness, told her she needed to hear him out. So on the night of the gala, she borrowed a simple ivory dress from Patricia's daughter, pinned her hair neatly, and arrived at the grand ballroom with trembling hands. The chandeliers sparkled above her like stars. Wealthy guests mingled, laughter echoed, and music flowed through the hall. She felt out of place yet strangely calm, as if destiny had guided her here. Then the lights dimmed and Alexander appeared on the stage. He looked different, not the powerful businessman she remembered, but a man stripped of all pretense, standing before the crowd with sincerity etched in every line of his face. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "tonight we celebrate not wealth but the power of compassion. This foundation was created because one person reminded me that humanity still matters more than success." His gaze found Emma across the room. "She taught me that kindness is not weakness, that humility is not defeat, and that sometimes the people we try to save are the ones saving us." A murmur rippled through the audience as he continued. "I once met a waitress who lost everything for doing the right thing. She fed a hungry stranger when no one else would. That moment changed my life. She doesn't know it, but every project, every donation, every act of generosity this foundation has made since then exists because of her." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "Emma Reyes, if you're here tonight, please know this. I never helped you out of pity. I helped you because you reminded me of the man I wanted to be. And if I ever made you feel small, then I failed at what love should be." The room fell silent. Emma's eyes blurred with tears as she realized every word came from the deepest part of him. Slowly she stepped forward, the crowd parting to let her through. When she reached the stage, Alexander's breath caught. She looked up at him, tears glistening on her cheeks, and whispered, "You didn't fail, Alexander. You just forgot that love doesn't need to hide." He smiled softly, relief washing over his features as he extended his hand. She took it, and the room erupted into gentle applause. After the event, they stepped outside into the cool night. The city lights shimmered on the water, reflecting the beginning of something new. Emma looked at him, her voice quiet but certain. "You changed my life, but not because of your money. You changed it because you believed I deserved more than the world gave me. That's something no amount of wealth can buy." Alexander took her hands in his. "And you changed mine because you showed me that love isn't about power. It's about presence." They stood there for a long time, the noise of the city fading around them. When he finally leaned forward and kissed her forehead, it felt less like an ending and more like a promise that compassion had the power to rebuild even the most broken hearts. Months later, the café expanded into a community center supported by the Grant Foundation, employing people who had fallen on hard times, offering free meals to the hungry, and giving scholarships to those who couldn't afford education. Emma managed it with grace while Alexander often visited quietly, not as a benefactor but as her partner in both purpose and life. Lily, now walking again, volunteered there too, greeting every visitor with her radiant smile. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the bay and the aroma of fresh coffee drifted through the air, Emma would look around at the place that had once been her refuge and whisper to herself, "This is what kindness builds." And somewhere deep within her heart, she knew that her life, the one that began with a simple act of compassion toward a stranger, had become a living testament that when you give with love, the universe always finds a way to give it back, multiplied, transformed, and eternal.